It's been the busiest week in professional cycling so far this year. Cobbled Classics season is in full swing with the one day of the Panne, the E3 Binckbank and one of the hardest ever editions of Ghent-Wevelgem. The climbers hit their stride at the Volta Catalunya, Mitchelton Scott dominate at the Coppi Bartali, and we've got the British e-cycling national championships, plus some urban cyclocross from Switzerland. But we shall start with Ghent-Wevelgem. In what was probably the most exciting race of the season so far, Alexander Kristoff of UAE Team Emirates nabbed the victory after outsprinting a 30-man group at the end of 251 kilometres of racing. Now, it's a race which we often refer to as the Sprinters Classic, but I think that reputation takes away from just how hard this race is, and this year's was as hard as any. And I've got some proof for you. Firstly, Matteo Trentin said on Twitter that it was the hardest edition of the race that he'd ever done. Secondly, it was the fastest ever edition of the race at over 46 kilometres per hour average. And thirdly, it was on from the gun, splitting in the crosswinds with the front group averaging close to 51 km per hour for the first 2.5 hours. And fourthly, according to Velon data, Alexander Kristoff averaged 345 watts for the entire 5.5 hours. I mean, he's a big lad, but that is off the scale incredible. So, there is no doubt that Kristoff's victory was won through sheer power and determination, but there was a little more to it than that. Firstly, he was tactically astute. So he attacked before the final ascent of the Kemmelberg because he knew that he would potentially get dropped on the steep slopes. So he decided to carve out an advantage before he even got there, and then was only caught by a small group once he was over the top. And then, as pointed out by Robbie McEwen, he also had some subtle help from teammate Fernando Gaviria in the sprint. Robbie has termed this the reverse lead out. So here you can see the Colombian get onto the wheel of his teammate, but when Kristoff launches his sprint, Gaviria lets off the gas. That firstly gives Kristoff some room, but more importantly, it means it's a while before anybody gets onto the wheel of the Norwegian and into his slipstream. So, well done to Alexander Kristoff. With that display of power and tenacity, you are this week's GCN Rider of the Week. One of the other rides of the day, though, had to be from Mathieu van der Poel. He bridged across to that initial front group in the crosswinds on his own, continued to attack on the later climbs of the day, and then, despite getting blocked in more than once, managed to get fourth in the final sprint to the line. 24 years old, in his fourth road race of the year, his first ever World Tour race, gets fourth, and absolutely nobody is surprised. I can't wait to see what that lad can do at the Tour of Flanders this coming Sunday. The women's race was also flat out from the start. They'd averaged over 43 km per hour in the first hour, but despite the ferocious pace and a whole flurry of attacks, we would ultimately have a sprint from a group of almost 90 riders. The winner? The experienced track star and sprinter Kirsten Wild of the WNT Rotor Pro cycling team. She kicked from a long way out and, like Kristoff, made the win look almost easy. Now 36 years of age, Wild is showing no signs of slowing down, although she is now looking over her shoulder at some very young competition. So second place on the day went to Loreno Vives, who's just 20 years old. She has had one win and 2 second places at the last 3 cobbled races. Letizia Paternoster is even younger at just 19, and she got third. Now, before we finish with Ghent-Wevelgem, there are a couple of other notable performances from the day, which saw no less than 7 different categories competing. So, you have probably heard the name Magnus Bagstedt, the winner of Paris-Roubaix in 2004. He's now a pundit on Eurosport, and we've even had the privilege of having him commentate here at GCN. However, he might need to move over now to make room for 2 budding stars in his family. His daughters Zoe and Eleanor won the under-17 and under-19 races respectively, which was quite the family day out, and we've had this message sent over from Zoe.
I managed to solo break away 35 kilometres. I put the pressure down in the cobbles on going through the first time, and managed to stay away from then, put 3 minutes 45 seconds into the group by the finish. And it was something different to the UK, not used to this at all, cobbled finish, which was really nice too.
There's some modesty for you. Now, Ghent-Wevelgem wasn't the only Cobbled Classic last week. It all started on Wednesday with the 3 days of the Panne, which is now just one day. It has become part of the World Tour for both the men's and women's events, though. Both races ended up in a big bunch sprint. The former won by Dylan Groenewegen on the Wednesday with an incredible display of speed in the finale, and then Kirsten Wild again taking the women's race the following day. Then on Friday, we had the mini Tour of Flanders, now named the E3 Binckbank Classic. There, we saw another De Koning quick-step masterclass. Bob Jungels, who's still relatively inexperienced at the Cobbled Classics, headed out on a long solo mission with 60 kilometres still remaining. He caught and passed the early breakaway, and for a long time, it looked as though his efforts might be rewarded with a second Cobbled win in the space of just a few weeks. However, with Van Avermaet, Naesen, Wout van Aert and a much improved Alberto Bettiol putting in a strong chase behind, the Luxembourg champion was eventually reeled in with just 7 kilometres remaining to the finish line. However, his effort was not in vain because that 53 kilometres spent out in front had allowed teammates Zdeněk Stybar to sit on behind, and you could argue that saving that energy was pivotal in the final sprint, Stybar getting the better of Van Aert and Van Avermaet. It took him almost 9 years of trying to win his first cobbled one-day race a few weeks ago, but now he's won 2 in the space of a few weeks. And according to the Road Book over on Twitter, that is only the 4th time in history that former World Cyclocross champions have finished 1-2 in a pro road race. Apart from Jungle's epic adventure, standout performance of the day had to be from young Mark Hirschi. He is just 20 years old and became the youngest top 10 finisher at the E3 race since Fabio Follini back in 2010, and that despite having been in the breakaway all day. And so, there is now only one warm-up race left between now and the Tour of Flanders on Sunday, and that's the Dwars-door-Vlaanderen this coming Wednesday. So, with that in mind, it's time to make your predictions for De Ronde on Sunday in the comment section just down below. My personal bet is Wout van Aert for the men's race. He's been Mr. Consistency so far this year in the one-day races, but without a win, and I think he's going to pull off the big one on Sunday. Whilst in the women's, I'm going to go for Chantal Blaak of Boels-Dormans. Away from the cobblestones of Belgium, the biggest race of last week was the Volta Catalunya. That's a 7-day World Tour stage race down in Spain. First day, first breakaway for Lotto Soudal's Thomas de Gent, who, even by his own standards, put in a monstrous performance to not just hang on for the win, but take it by 2 minutes and 38 seconds. He would eventually concede the lead on day 4, but would go on to take the King of the Mountains competition, adding to the polka dot jersey that he won at Paris-Nice a couple of weeks ago. Michael Matthews reversed his and his team's fortunes so far this season to take 2 stage wins for Team Sunweb, whilst Max Schachmann impressed on pretty much every stage, eventually taking a win on day 5. The GC battle though was enthralling. 3 Colombians, Egan Bernal, Nairo Quintana and Miguel Angel Lopez, plus the Brit Adam Yates. It was Yates who took the first mountaintop finish on stage 3 to Volta 2000. The strongest that day was clearly Bernal, but some cat and mouse between he and Quintana allowed a few others to get back on, and it was Yates who was the fastest to the line that day. However, the race was eventually decided on the following day to La Molina. Lopez's attack with 5k's to go was enough to give him both the stage victory and the overall race lead, which he took from Thomas de Gent. And despite their best efforts, his rivals were unable to dislodge him from the top spot over the remaining stages. That then marks Astanar's 8th overall stage race win of 2019 so far, and their 21st win with 9 different riders. Yates' daring attack on the final day didn't quite pay off, but he did end up with 2nd place overall for the 2nd World Tour race in succession, whilst Bernal had to settle for 3rd. That last day proved to be a tough one when it came to crashes though. 82R's Romain Bardet has suspected fractured ribs, whilst teammate Tony Gallopin got a trauma to his left shoulder, according to the team report. Marc Serre broke his right scaphoid, but the man I feel most sorry for is Simon Geschke. The rider from Team CCC returned to racing at Catalunya after breaking his elbow in the very first day of competition this year, but things have gone from bad to worse for the German, who broke his collarbone on the final day of racing. Ouch. Now, the other big stage race last week was the Settimana Coppa in Bartali, a slightly smaller race that gives the chance for young guns to shine, but also where stars such as Mikel Landa can find race-winning form that they need. The opening day is split into 2 stages, which is not something you see very much these days. The morning stage was won in a bunch sprint by Emils Liepins of Wallonie-Bruxelles, whilst Mitchelton Scott set themselves up for the rest of the race with a commanding victory in the afternoon's team time trial. The second day finished with a steep cobbled climb to the finish. Aussie Lucas Hamilton was the only rider able to stay with Mikel Landa when he attacked on the penultimate climb, but he couldn't prevent the Spaniard from taking the stage. Hamilton, however, took over the leader's jersey from his teammate Robert Stannard. And from there, Mitchelton Scott were in full control. Simone Velasco took a win for nearest Turley on stage 3, whilst Ludovic Rabiet got his first victory as a pro on stage 4. It set up everything very nicely for a final day of attacks, but those expected attacks on a big name didn't really materialise on the final climb. Mauro Finetto, riding for the national Italian team, went away on the final descent to gap everyone and take the win, with some impressive bike handling skills on display right there. However, there was no change that day on the general classification. Mitchelton Scott took 1, 2, 3 with Lucas Hamilton, Damien Howson and Nick Schultz respectively. Average age of those 3? Just 24. The future is bright on the GC prospects for that team. Now, the first ever British Cycling e-racing national championships took place last week with a live final televised on BT Sport. Over 3 events, an elimination, a points race and a scratch race, 10 riders competed for a virtual jersey that they will get to wear in Zwift for a year. Rosamund Bradbury, a former member of the GB rowing squad, won the women's race, setting up her victory by dominating the opening elimination race, whilst in the men's race, UK continental team Madison Genesis were expected to dominate, fielding 4 out of the 10 riders in the final. However, it was Cameron Jeffers, who only made it to the finals after 2 riders dropped out, that took victory with a show of unbelievable strength. He won the points race and then finished second in the other 2 rounds. I think it's fair to say though that e-racing isn't super popular with everybody just yet, as this tweet by Tom Pidcock showed. The responses to that were very mixed. My personal view, if you want it, I'm sure you don't, but you're about to get it anyway, is that you need to separate this in your head from real world racing and enjoy it for what it is, rather than comparing the two. It's just something different. If it gets kids into sport, either competing or just watching as fans, then I am all for it, and there's no doubt that the organisers did a fantastic job of putting on a very entertaining evening. Now, as an example of something which I thought was really cool to come out of the evening, the runner-up in the men's event, James Phillips, he's over 30, he's a self-employed driving instructor with 2 kids who broke his leg 4 months ago. So it offers an opportunity for people like James to compete amongst some top pros, even though he doesn't get the time to put the training in to compete over 5-hour road races. Anyway, I am sure that you have all got strong opinions on this new format, so feel free to get stuck into the comments below to tell us what you do or don't like about it. And there's also a poll on the screen right now. Are you a fan of e-racing or not? Now, if you are already pining for the return of cyclocross racing, then over in Zurich last weekend, we might just have the race for you. Switzerland's EKZ Cross Tour is one of the most popular series outside of Belgium and is responsible for the resurgence of the Swiss cross scene. The urban cyclocross takes cross to the city streets, making the most of the city's architecture. The 1.4 kilometre loop includes man-made BMX whoops, a van, plus a section of stairs, making for some extremely intense racing. Basically, this is cyclocross, but with a very entertaining twist. In the women's race, a technical mistake cost Nicole Koller the chance to go for victory and allowed Ellen van Looy to sail away to the win, whilst in the men's, Marcel Wildhaber backed up his win from 2017 with another one this year. He got off to the perfect start in the final round, and nobody was able to get back on terms before the finish. Wow, that was a busy week of racing, but that is all for this week's show. Next week I will be back with Dwarsdorp-Vlaanderen, plus the first cobbled monument, the Tour of Flanders, which I personally cannot wait for. We'll also have the Giro de Sicilia, which makes a return after being absent from the calendar for a few decades. You can watch highlights of both those Cobbled Classics though over on our Facebook page, so keep your eyes peeled for them. You've probably noticed that I'm also wearing our special Cobbled Classics t-shirt, which is now available over at shop.globalcyclingnetwork.com. You can find a link to that on the screen right now. And if you'd like some more content to watch, you can watch Ollie racing himself up Sacalobra. Could he beat 30 minutes with every advantage in the world? Find out just down here.